where do I begin? What's the first thing I should do? And like I said, how did I get here? Hetepu, family, peace and blessings. This is Derek Rakumor, and in this video, I want to talk about what was my journey. My journey into Kemetic Spirituality. So in this video, I'm going to talk about actually how I got into Kemetic Spirituality, what started me in this whole process, the pitfalls, the ups and downs, the whole deal, all the way into who I am and how I got to where I am today. Okay. Part of the reason for doing this video is mainly because there's been I've received quite a few requests of people asking, where do I begin? What's the first thing I should do? And like I said, how did I get here? So that's what we're going to go ahead and we're going to cover in this video. Okay. So what is consciousness? Well, when I first got involved in this, from my understanding, a lot of people really didn't refer to themselves as being, conscious or woke. Okay. This was just basically a term that a lot of people were using, to refer to each other, because when they were saying, hey, is this individual conscious? When they were asking, is this individual conscious? Or they were saying, hey, I'm conscious or so. For the most part, it referred to, by definition, consciousness means be aware. So it was referring to the fact that individuals were basically, they were aware that something was going on. Okay. The first thing, the movie I think of when I think of consciousness is John Carpenter's They Live, starring, I think Roddy Piper and Larry David. Okay. In this movie, it's a classic cult film. In this movie, they put on some sunglasses. They get into it and they put on these sunglasses. And as soon as they put on these sunglasses, the sunglasses allows them to see all the different programmings that's going on, and they also see like different aliens that are there. Okay. They're able to see these people who are basically aliens. And that's pretty much what consciousness was. Okay. Like I said, when I first got into it, that's pretty much what it dealt with. Okay. And there was different pockets of consciousness. Okay. There was consciousness in regards to the additives and all that kind of stuff that they're putting in food. There was consciousness in regards to the textbooks that they give, the youth, they give the schools to teach kids, that gives them social programming in regards to accepting, quote unquote, and I'm saying quote unquote because this is really what it was, but accepting your inferiority, accepting that, accepting inferiority. Okay. Because there was no mention of anything in the history books in regards to, there was nothing positive about anybody of any person of color, So there was nothing positive about African people, nothing positive about Native Americans in your history books. It was just, it all basically was very, very Eurocentric. Okay. So consciousness, it dealt with a whole lot of things, and especially consciousness, it referred to, there was a consciousness in regards to religion and spirituality. Okay. So like I said, when I first got into consciousness, when I first got, into the whole movement and everything, that's basically how people kind of looked at it. Like I said, it wasn't this commercialized and bastardized version of, wokeness that everybody is claiming to be now. It actually referred to the fact that you were aware that there was some type of programming, that there's something that's going on that was, that wasn't right, that made you think and made you ask, what the hell, that's what it dealt with. Okay. And, you know, I mean, there was even consciousness in regards to politics. There was consciousness in regards to, you know, secret societies. It dealt with the whole deal. Okay, consciousness in regards to the entertainment, you know, industry, all of it. It all dealt with being conscious. Okay. So, how did I get involved? Well, there was a few things that took place. As I've mentioned before, as I've written in my books, part of the reason why I got involved in this whole thing was mainly because it kind of started when I was in the church. Okay, when I was growing up, I was a kid. I'm in the church around it was the mid '80s or so. This is when the crack cocaine epidemic hit, and it was like somehow it was like right after the civil rights movement or so. It was like a lot of churches, they really pulled back and they weren't involved in politics. They just got out of the whole anything that dealt with social ills. They just didn't, they took like a hands off approach. They just didn't touch it. Okay. And it's almost as if a lot of churches or a lot of, religious leaders was like, hey, we saw what happened to Martin Luther King, so we're not getting involved, consequently, and this is, like I said, this is coming from, from an outsider looking in. This is what it appeared to me, especially as a kid. But yeah, it was like a lot of churches, they went ahead and they took that perspective, and instead of them going ahead and getting involved in politics, it was like they all were all about this whole economic thing. They were all about, let's see who can build the biggest church. So around the mid 1980s or so, that's when the crack cocaine epidemic hit. And it was, everybody who knew about that, everybody who grew up in that era, they basically, you know how it was. Okay. It was real horrid. All right. And it was, there was a lot of people that was just, dying. They was either dying from it or they was dying because of, the violence, attached to it. And the way in which the church dealt with it was, hey, go into the church, give your life to Jesus and pray. All right. And for the most part, that didn't work. Okay. I ain't gonna say for the most part. Let me just be honest. It didn't work. Okay. And I remember, like I said, I was really, really trying my best. Hey, gotta give my life to Jesus. And like I said, yeah, it didn't work. So because it didn't work, I went through this whole psychological thing of, God not wanting me, Jesus not wanting me, not being one of the chosen 144,000 and all this other kind of stuff. I went through that whole, that whole issue. Okay. Put me into a mild depression and all that kind of stuff. And what eventually happened was I got inspiration, which I found out was a spirit guide that basically went ahead and told me, hey, you need to go ahead and study the ancient Egyptian religion. Okay. And that's what basically went ahead and started it. Okay. In the process of coming to that, in the process of actually going through those steps, there was other things that went ahead and they kind of, basically was kind of like, what do you call it? Like tidbits that helped me, that encouraged me to also, such as the whole, basically, like I said, give my life to Jesus, and then that wasn't working. Trying to think what were some other things. The fact that everything was basically logical, it was like you would interpret everything logical, and it was like it wasn't making any sense, or not logical, but literal. Interpret everything literal, and yeah, it's not making any sense, I mean, like the fact that you weren't even supposed to question, you weren't supposed to question any of this. I mean, it was like, really, like, to honestly believe that somebody actually, that Noah put like a male and female animal or of each species of the planet in one boat, and you're supposed to literally accept that. It was stuff like that that basically went ahead and it compounded the issue. But like I said, for the most part, it all started with the whole incident of the crack cocaine incident, and like I said, giving my life to Jesus and everything, and that not working. Okay, everything else basically just went ahead and it just added to it. What was it like when I first, started dealing with the conscious community? Um, well, first of all, like I said, it really wasn't. It wasn't like a religion or anything. Like I said, when I first got involved in it, um, people, again, you refer to yourself as being conscious because you were aware. Okay, and in Detroit, when they were talking about the conscious community, it just really referred to the same people you basically ran into when you went and saw a lecture, Um, and, that's what, it was like I started off with my boy, my boy went ahead and his parents, they were Black Panthers, former Black Panthers. So they had a whole lot of documents and everything, a whole lot of, lectures, Malcolm X lectures and everything. And that's where I started off now. Okay. And then I remember, after that, we would go and see, lectures from, Dr. Jeffries, um, Professor Smalls. I'm trying to think who else. We saw individuals, and if we didn't go see those individuals, if we didn't go, get a lecture or see them lecture rather, then we went ahead and we were listening to, recordings on the public access radio, and we hear, Steve Coakley and all that kind of stuff. We heard those individuals, okay? So like I said, that's where it was that's what kind of started that whole thing, and that's what kept it going. And, when you first got into it and everything, for the most part, I'm trying to think, it was cool, mainly because you felt different from other people who seemed to be, or who were basically hoodwinked. Okay. One of the things that was cool about it was the fact that during that time there was a lot of what is, even though it's almost like non-existent today. It was what was called conscious rap. Okay. Now the interesting thing was that when hip hop was out, when rap, just came out and everything, like I said, in the mid '80s or so, everybody for the most part had a little bit of, all the rappers for the most part had a little bit of consciousness in them. They didn't all talk, they weren't all politicized. They didn't all, they weren't all militant or so. They weren't all quote unquote, conscious, but they talked, they peppered, their rap. They peppered their songs with a little bit of, consciousness, a little bit of things, because it was like, this was stuff, these were things that were basically affecting them, regardless of what your level of understanding or awareness was, But so it was like, some of the main groups, that I listened to during that time was Poor Righteous Teachers, everybody listened to Public Enemy, Brand Nubians, of course, Gangstar and Guru. I mean, like I said, everybody was into that. The first rapper that actually that got me onto this was KRS-One. His song "My Philosophy," BDP's song "My Philosophy." That joint was, that's a classic. And then, like I said, then you spin off a little bit. You hear Rakim, Rakim going ahead, and he was spitting spitting verses and everything that later you found out was Supreme Mathematics. So, I mean, there was a little bit of consciousness that was involved in everybody, in in the whole rap community. And that was, like I said, that was one of the cool things about about being quote unquote conscious, was because you were able to interpret it. Okay, some people, the people who were not quote unquote conscious, they just listened to it and they heard the beat, they heard the lyric. But when you get into the conscious, when you start getting into the conscious movement, you start becoming aware of things. You're able to interpret it. You're able to hear certain things, and it's like, wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But then you're seeing kind of like what we would call the history and the science and everything about it. So there was, like I said, there was quite a few groups that was like that. X-Clan was another one, that we was really into, at that time. The other cool thing about being being conscious was the fact that it opened you up to meeting other people outside of your culture. Okay. I'll never forget, once I went ahead and I got into this, I was able to have conversations with, Rastafarians, full conversations with Rastafarians. Of course, you had conversations with, the brothers and sisters that was in the Nation of Islam as well. But I'll never forget, I went ahead, I remember having a conversation with, there was this one guy who was from Egypt, and he even was confirming certain things. So it was, like I said, it was pretty cool. It's pretty cool to go ahead and be involved in that, because it opened you up to that. It gave you a different kind of awareness. It was kind of like basically traveling without actually traveling and getting that experience, because you also went ahead and you like I said, you come across different cultures. You embrace different cultures, and you also learn about other cultures and everything in regards to their food and language and everything. And you also find out they're having similar issues. They're having this similar kind of awareness or this similar kind of awakening. Okay, so that's how it was. That's what it was like when being in the conscious community. The thing about consciousness was that somehow there was a blending or mingling that took place. Okay, like I said, when I first got into the whole consciousness thing, there wasn't. It was very loose. Okay. There wasn't like a particular, it wasn't like you go to church, okay, and you all belong to the same belief, or you all have the same faith. It wasn't like that, okay. You could go to a lecture, and there you could be sitting next to somebody who was, who was a Muslim. You could be sitting next to someone who was a Christian. You could be sitting next to someone who was, Rastafarian. You could be sitting around or sitting next to someone who was just a, straight out atheist. Okay, there wasn't any actual, like I said, it wasn't any like actual belief system or anything, or when it came to dealing with consciousness. Okay, the thing that was popping at the time, like I said, we're talking like the mid 80s or so when this starts taking place, mid 80s, late 80s or so, 1980s or so. The thing that was popping at the time was the whole thing about Kemetic, the Kemetic history, okay, or Afrocentricity, okay, and a lot of conscious people were not really tied to Afrocentricity, but somehow it kind of ended up mingling. Okay, both of them ended up mingling. All right, and within that process, within the consciousness mingling with, the Afrocentricity, you also had Kemetic spirituality that was also, it was growing and evolving at the same time. Okay. So this is how, in my understanding, how, from what I remember, this is how all of a sudden you started hearing people say Hotep. Okay. Because I remember the first time going to lectures, I don't recall anybody saying Hotep. Okay. I remember them saying, hey, assalamu alaikum, peace, or greeting people by saying peace. But like I said, later on, as things kept, like I said, probably around the late 80s or whatever, that's when they started hearing people say Hotep. Okay. And when that started taking place, you could see there was, like I said, you could see that the conscious movement or consciousness was actually blending with a lot of Afrocentricity, but Kemetic spirituality still remained, it was evolving, but Kemetic spirituality, for the most part, it still remained as a separate entity, as a separate movement. Okay. And the difference between the conscious movement and or conscious and, like I said, Afrocentricity that basically blended, and you have what eventually people started calling them Hoteppers. The difference between that group and that, that movement and Kemetic spirituality, the key difference, or I don't want to say the key difference, but one of the major differences I started noticing was that people who practice Kemetic spirituality, whenever they did any kind of lecture, whenever they did any of that kind of, they did a lecture or any kind of speech or presentation or whatever, they always began with libation. Okay. And that right there was like the key difference between, like I said, the conscious movement and people who was involved in Afrocentricity versus Kemetic spirituality. Okay. What were my baby steps in Kemetic spirituality? So, like I said, so I already was making that shift because, as I mentioned, I got that inspiration to go ahead and study the ancient Egyptian religion. So I'd already started making a shift into, getting involved in Kemetic spirituality. But that's a process. That was a process to even get there. So when I started making that move to get involved in Kemetic spirituality, what I ended up doing was, I remember, getting, remember going to a thrift store. No, I didn't go to a thrift store. I think I went to an antique store. That's what it was. Some of those, because I remember I was in college and down there at Prairie View. And I remember, I think I was down there. I'm not, not trying to incriminate myself. But anyway, remember I went ahead and I had gone to an antique store, one of those antique shops and everything. And I had already had fabric and all that kind of stuff to go ahead and make shrines and, my altars and everything. And I remember, I'll never forget, went ahead and I called myself, I was going to do a meditation. I was going to do a ritual. Okay. Now, I had an idea what a ritual was, but because of me coming from, the background, the Christian background I came from, which was Apostolic Pentecostal, in which we didn't learn about no spirits, we didn't learn about any of that. It was always Jesus only, Jesus only, and you were sanctified, and that was it. Okay. But because of that, I remember, like I said, set up some shrines, I called myself going to do a ritual. And, like I said, I'll never forget. did the ritual and everything. Somehow I fell asleep, and all I remember was my roommate was like banging on the door. Was like, dude, is something smoking up in there? You know? Yeah. It was like something caught on fire. Okay. So that was my first baby steps in Kemetic spirituality. I remember the next time I ended up trying to do a ritual, this ritual, it failed horribly. I basically was doing a ritual, and it was like the ritual was to basically I think it was like to pass a class or something. And for the most part, what was going on, part of the reason why I was failing was because, I had kind of like, I guess, that Harry Potter idea of what rituals were. It was like, oh, you do this ritual and everything, and magically something appears out the blue, and everything, God is going to come down, and voila, there it is. Okay. So there was this big, big illusion, disillusion, I guess, in regards to what Kemetic spirituality was about. And those were basically my failed attempts in regards to, doing rituals and everything. The other thing, as I'm trying to make this make these steps, this transition from, like I said, from the Afrocentric consciousness into Kemetic spirituality, is that I ran into a lot of people. I don't want to say a lot, but I ran into quite a few people who basically, they were into it. They were into Kemetic spirituality, and they were doing things, but I wasn't able to actually spend time with them and actually learn from them, how they were doing things or what their progress was, or any of that. But there was also a lot of people that I ran into that were, I don't want to say they were charlatans, but they were kind of like people you found in the church, cherry pickers. It was like certain things they would follow, other things they wouldn't. Certain things they would do, some things they wouldn't. It was just based upon however they felt. And unfortunately, because of that, that was some of my not so positive experiences with the whole Kemetic thing, okay? Because some of these individuals, because of them being, like I said, cherry pickers or whatever, they were kind of unscrupulous, and they did some unscrupulous things. This is how I ended up losing some money and time and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, that's, for the most part, you find that everywhere, and now I can explain why that happens, but at the time I didn't understand it. Okay. But yeah, that was pretty much my baby steps in Kemetic spirituality. So after I went ahead and I had, like I said, been in quite a few study groups, Kemetic study groups, and I'm still trying to make this transition to Kemetic spirituality from the whole, like I said, consciousness and Afrocentric movement. I had these failed rituals that was going on. I'm dealing with some of these individuals. Like I said, there was a few individuals who basically, they just, like I said, they totally put a bad taste in my mouth, in regards to the whole thing. But, for the most part, like I said, I went ahead and I'm still trying to make that transition. I'm like, hey, because again, that inspiration to study the Kemetic religion is still strong within me. Okay. So I'm still going ahead. I'm trying to make that transition. And it was basically what ended up happening was that I was almost there. Okay. I was almost like ready to quit. All right. And that's when I met Papa. All right. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, basically Papa was this, this black Cuban man. And, he was a priest, a high priest. He was a Babalao in Lukumi. He was, like I said, he was a spiritist. He practiced the Spiritismo Cruzado. He also, or what is also called cross spiritism. He also was a member of the Abacuá Society in Cuba. And, he was a child of Alegua, So when I met him, he gave me a whole different perspective on what it meant to be spiritual, on what African spirituality or Afro-diasporic spirituality was about. He basically, like I said, he taught me a whole lot. Okay, and that's why I still have a whole lot of great respect and love for him, and view him as, he was like he was the greatest mentor I've had. And the reason why I say that is because, it was through him that basically what I learned is that here in the United States, we have this idea, or at least I had this idea, that anybody who practices spirituality, well, you got to have this, you got to have this type of garb that you walk around, this attire. You are, you're very loft, you're very, got this air about you. Okay. And it's like, it's almost like, I always made that comparison of the 1970, what is it, TV show, Kwai Kang of Kung Fu. It was like, you're not supposed to, you're very, very, high up type of deal. You're so spiritual and all this other kind of stuff. You're not real, you're basically a monk. And like I said, Papa shattered all that. He basically helped me to see that wasn't real. Some of that stuff is, maybe some people do that, but it's like, that's not how African spirituality is practiced, He basically helped me to understand that African spirituality, for the most part, is practiced. It's a way of life. Okay, because another misconception that I think a lot of people have is that when they talk about African spirituality or anything relating to Afro-diasporic spirituality, you always assume, or you always think that it only focuses on magic. It's all about magic. And in fact, there's some people, if you go ahead and you deal with some communities, it's like that's all they focus on. Oh, I went ahead and I hexed this person and all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, like I said, Papa was like, that's not, that's some people who might be dealing with stuff like that, but that's not African spirituality. That's not African spirituality focuses on, there's a lot of evolution, a lot of spiritual growth that deals with spiritual, deals with any African spirituality or true African spirituality. And like I said, that's really what basically helped me to understand that. But like I said, the thing that I remember the most about Papa was that, like I said, he scolded me when he found out that I was trying to mimic the ancient Egyptian religion or the Kemetic religion. Okay. And he was the one that told me, he was like, that's not it, culture is always changing. Excuse me. He was saying culture is always changing. Culture is not, it's not static. Culture is very dynamic. You have to change with the times. So trying to do something that the Kemetic people did thousands of years ago compared to what's going on now, completely different, And that was one of the key points that helped me to realize what I was doing wrong, because a lot of the people that I came in contact who was dealing with the Kemetic, who was dealing with Kemetic spirituality, that's pretty much how they was approaching it, a lot of the individuals who was dealing with it from, like I said, from the Afrocentric perspective, it was like that's how they were approaching it, and I understand this now. That's part of the reason why I had the fire. That's part of the reason why I had, the failed, rituals when I started off in Kemetic spirituality, because I was trying to approach it, or I was thinking that this is how you're supposed to practice it, because hey, this is Kemetic, and this is the way it looks on TV, and this is the way people were saying it. And, like I said, they have this whole high, astute way of doing things. And it's like, like I said, Papa was like, that's not spirituality. That's not African spirituality, and even if it is, then it's not working for you. And this is the reason why it's not working, so that's what happened when I went ahead and I met Papa. And that was one of the reason why, like I say, the major influence he had on my life in regards to the whole spirituality thing. This is what happened, okay? I remember after Papa told me that he, like I say, he scolded me about that. I remember right after that, it was like not too long ago, or not too long later, I should say, I lost contact with him. Okay, I don't know what happened. It was like, it was really mysterious. It was almost like, he was meant to come in, tell me that message, and then he was out. Okay, and the interesting thing about it was that I've had situations like that where I've met people that have done that before. It was like, they come into your life, they say what they're going to say, and then you don't see them anymore, okay? And like I said, that's pretty much, what happened with Papa. And like I said, and because of that, I was still trying to make that transition. I was still trying to understand how to make the transition. And when that took place, I was like, man, I was like, F this, forget this. I was like, I'm through, because I initially started off to try to go ahead and become closer to God. I initially was trying to, wanted Jesus to save me. And like I said, that didn't work. And here was I went through all this. I'm still trying to study the Kemetic religion and all that kind of stuff. And like I said, I just really felt like I wasn't going anywhere. So I was like, okay, well, whatever. I'm out. Forget this. We finish. And, it was like right after I said that, I think it was like maybe a year or two later or so, I ended up meeting an Oshun priestess. And this Oshun priestess, I remember she gave me a reading. She did a reading for me. And what came up in the reading was, I was called to be a shaman. And she explained, this is the reason why you're having all these issues, because you're not accepting your calling. Okay. And I'll never forget when she told me that. I was like, yeah, okay. I took it. I don't want to say I didn't take it seriously initially, because in the beginning I did. In fact, it was like, it felt good to actually get some clarity on something and explain, okay, well, this is what happens. But I didn't feel, it was like after that, I kind of was still pissed off about it, mainly because it was like, I felt like I was in the church again, felt like I was given those same directions, how in the church, it's like, oh, okay, you do this and something's going to take place, but you don't necessarily know, but give your life to God, give your life to Jesus, and everything's going to be okay. That's kind of how I felt. It was like, you're going to be a shaman, But it was like, okay, well, what's the steps that I got to take in order to be that shaman? You know, what do I need to do to go ahead and accept the call and get all that kind of stuff? What's the next step? And it was like, it wasn't there. Okay, so that's why after that, like I said, I was like, man, okay, whatever, forget it, I'm through. And I just focused on, focused on making money, focused on my career, focused on going back to school and everything. So because I had dropped out of school, by the way, just to pursue this whole thing of becoming more spiritual and learning about Kemetic spirituality and all that. So, after I went ahead and like I said, I got that reading and I focused back on, I went ahead and I started focusing back on, like I said, my career, going to school and all that kind of stuff. I remember I went ahead and I was working in the lab, okay? And I'm working in the laboratory and everything, and it was like my weight started dropping. And I mean, I wasn't trying to diet, but it was like I was losing weight. And didn't notice it until I actually went to the doctor, and it was like, okay, yeah, it was like, you've lost 20 pounds. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I'm not even trying to lose 20 pounds, I mean, and it was like right after that took place, that's when all the other, issues started going on. And had had pneumonia and all that kind of stuff. And then next thing you know, being rushed to the hospital and being life flighted and all that kind of stuff. And that's when the illness and everything took place. So what was the rebirth? Well, the rebirth that took place, and it's interesting. I'm trying to put it in words, but basically the rebirth that took place was that it was like all of a sudden, it was like things made sense, once I went ahead and I had, surrendered. Okay. And I mean, I forgot, I didn't mention this, but basically what took place, it was like the second time I was in I ended up going to the hospital. I'm in the ICU and everything. And this is when I'm seeing my spirits, okay? Because prior to this, part of the reason why I was also going through all this is because I didn't really, like I say, it came out of a apostolic Pentecostal background, so I didn't know anything about spirits. I didn't know anything about ancestors. I didn't know anything about any of that, spirit guides and all that kind of stuff. These were all things I basically had to learn. And in the process of actually going through this, I remember, like I said, I was in a hospital, and that's when I'm starting to see my spirits. Now, I didn't see them like no full apparition or that kind of stuff. It wasn't like they appeared in front of me like they show them in the movies and all that kind of stuff. But I could see them in my thoughts. It was like, my grandmother, I would hear her voice. I'm asking a question and that question comes back. Okay. The question comes back, or I should say the answer comes back rather. So it was things like that. It was a lot of surrendering to your higher self type of deal. Okay. And this is what I call it the rebirth, because this is where I'm actually making the full transition into Kemetic spirituality. I'm really getting into the whole Kemetic spirituality. And, as I eventually, and I mean, I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically when I go ahead and I go through this whole process, eventually I'm able to look back and I see that part of the reason why I was having the issue that I was having was because I was wrapped up in that whole consciousness. Okay. I was wrapped in the conscious movement. I was wrapped in the whole Afrocentricity. And it was hard to go ahead and do, like I said, those are two different, that and Kemetic spirituality, two completely different things, And just to give you an example, for instance, it was like when I'm in the consciousness, I'm in the Kemetic, I'm in the Afrocentricity, movement, everything. It's like, you go ahead and you recite the 42 laws of Ma'at, okay? I have a statue of Ma'at. I'm all about Ma'at and everything because, hey, guess what? This came from Kemet, and this is the precursor to the 10 Commandments, or the inspiration behind the 10 Commandments. So you basically, it was like a prideful thing. It was a cultural thing, okay? But like I said, it wasn't working. I wasn't living my life according to the laws of I tried, but it was like, yeah, I'm not doing that, eventually it got to that point because it was like, what's the point? There was no type of growth in it. And they were actually, you're dealing with Ma'at and everything, or you're claiming to deal with Ma'at, but that's from the Afrocentric, that conscious perspective. That's what it basically was. You're mimicking, okay? After I made this transition, okay, got a personal relationship with Ma'at, okay, and the one thing that another key difference between Kemetic spirituality versus the whole Afrocentric and the conscious movement, or Hoteppers, is that most people who practice the spirituality aspect of it, they understand the science behind it, okay? So, for instance, you'll always hear people in the church, they'll talk about, it's God's will. Okay, well, if it's God's will, then it'll be done. Okay, and I've heard so many people use that incorrectly. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to try to lose weight or anything, and if I die, well, it's God's will. You know what I mean? I'm not going to try to improve my health. If I'm taken away from this, then that's God's will. And I've heard many of people use that in the church, okay? I've heard a lot of people who were in the, like I said, the Hoteppers, I've heard them use that in some sense. They were worded a different way. They'll take the God aspect out of it, but that's what they're saying, okay? But I know from a Kemetic spiritual perspective, God's will is synchronicity, okay? That's what I mean when I'm saying the science, all right? If I go ahead and I'm speaking something, I'm talking about something, and this is something that needs to manifest, this is something I'm wanting, then this is when you'll see somebody come up out of nowhere and say, hey, they'll give me the answer, or I have a dream about it, That let me know that we got ancestors, we got spirit guides, this is God's will, okay? And that's one of the key differences, like I said, between the conscious and the Hoteppers, or what have you, and Kemetic spirituality. Another key difference, and this is one of the things that came out of the whole Kemetic spirituality experience, is that in the church, you're basically taught to give your life to Jesus, or give your life to God, so God can save you, so Jesus can save you, or whomever else, okay? So you're basically taught this way so that you develop a dependency, I'm gonna do this because I need Jesus to do this, okay? Because a lot of people who were in the conscious movement have not a lot of them were former Christians, but they have not come to peace with their Christian background. They haven't come to peace, so as a result, they end up, what do you call it, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Because they haven't come to peace with that, and they don't understand that, they'll use that same, even though they say, okay, well, I'm not about being Christian, they will take the whole consciousness, and that becomes the thing that they have to give themselves to in order for them to be saved. Okay, so it becomes their new religion. You change your diet and if you don't change your diet, this is what's going to happen. So now vegetarianism or veganism or whatever way, it ends up becoming the new religion. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And they have all these different things that happen like that. Okay, that's not the case in Kemetic spirituality. In Kemetic spirituality, you're not giving yourself to anything. Okay, in Kemetic spirituality, you save yourself. Okay, and like I said, that's the beautiful thing. So I mean, you can that transition to Kemetic spirituality is peaceful. It is hopeful. It's very optimistic. Okay, you understand. Some people will go ahead and they'll tell you, because they have different, different relationships with the Kemetic divinities or so, and it's to each his own, okay? But those individuals, like I said, you can tell that they're in Kemetic spirituality because at least they had that relationship. At least they can talk about it from their perspective, okay? I'm trying to think, another key difference, another thing I noticed that is different between like I said, the Hotep community or the Hoteppers and Kemetic spirituality. Another key difference is this. In Kemetic spirituality, you do magic, okay? And the reason why you do magic is because it's an expression of your divinity, right? And that's not what you're going to learn when you're dealing with the Hoteppers, okay? But you'll learn that in Kemetic spirituality. This is part of the reason why we do magic, okay? Because it's part of our divinity. It's, we don't see ourselves no different from Jesus, all right? Jesus is basically, if Jesus did exist, which we don't really care, but I'm just saying, if Jesus did exist, we're doing the same thing that Jesus is trying to do, or Jesus did, and that's the big difference between Kemetic spirituality versus, like I said, all these other, those who are not involved in Kemetic spirituality. Because of us having this science now, because of us having this understanding, we don't interpret things from a literal perspective. We see it all metaphorically, okay? That's like, I recall, it's very difficult for people who are not involved in Kemetic spirituality in true Kemetic spirituality, to explain why Osir and Oset, why they are brother and sister and also considered husband and wife. It's very difficult for them to understand that because they're looking at it from a literal perspective. That same literal perspective that they use when they're trying to interpret the Bible, okay? And that's the reason why they see it like that, all right? We understand it, it's a metaphor. We understand that you're talking about energies, okay? And if you're talking about energies, that's the relationship that they have, okay? So like I said, we're seeing it from a higher perspective, So anyway, like I said, that was my journey, okay? That was my journey into Kemetic spirituality. This is where I am right now. Hopefully that, hopefully that helped you, and that gives you a little bit of a clue as to how to, how to walk your path, and what, what choices and decisions and what roads you should be taking, or, in your life, okay, in regards to your spiritual development. All right. As always, thanks for liking, sharing, subscribing. Again, if you got any questions, you got any suggestions or so, anything to motivate me and try to inspire me to give you, some more insight, based upon my experience or so, drop me a line. Okay. Until next time, Hetepu. Peace.